Our final presentation is actually why IPv6 security is so hard. Chris is going to be doing it. I'm actually going to allow him to do his introduction and his bio because, unfortunately, the stuff they gave me was not as detailed as I would like. So I will let you go ahead and do that. Yeah, and with that, thanks. I turn it over.
Yeah, thank you very much. Welcome to the last presentation of this conference. I'm really looking forward to it. Just a couple of sentences to me. I'm Christopher Werni. I'm working for ERNW. We are a Germany-based security company doing primarily security assessments of all kinds. I'm in charge of the network and IPv6 team, and I will present today on the topic why IPv6 security is so hard and the structural deficits of IPv6 and their applications, implications, of course. So before we start, I have a couple of disclaimers. The first one, this talk will be going to be a rant. Not for the reason that I'm a skeptic. It's quite the contrary. We are doing a lot of IPv6 projects on both planning and designing and the technical level. And I have been involved in IPv6 in 2003, and given it's already and finally here, it wouldn't help anyway. So, and to some degree, I'm enthusiastic and excited about IPv6, and from that angle, it is sad and scary to see some developments, particular in the standardization space and in some other spaces. So what I will do is we'll highlight what goes or what has gone wrong in the last 15 to 18 years in the standardization and development of IPv6. And I try to lay out, okay, what does this mean for us implementing IPv6 and what are the consequences of that. So, second disclaimer, this is probably the presentation with the most RFC references I ever held. And I really hope it is the last one with those many RFC references for a long time. So, third disclaimer is, as you may hear, I have a little bit of cold, as my European body is not used to the American way of doing air conditioning. So, my voice is a little bit sketchy, so, but I'll try to do my best. So, having said that, let's start with the show. So, the first thing, the two most important RFCs ever written from the IETF are RFC 1925, the 12 networking truths, and RFC 3439, some internet architectural guidelines and philosophy. I will cite those very often during the presentation. You be warned, I just wanted to make sure, but I can't unfortunately change it. That's just because of the subject. So, to the agenda. It is split in three parts. The first part is a little bit of an historical view. Where does IPv6 come from? What were the guiding principles during that time, so the mid-90s? What were the main steps in developing IPv6? Then I will head over to the properties. So what are the main properties of a certain subject, in this case the IPv6 protocol suite? And given those properties, what is the impact on network security and how we do it nowadays, and what might change by IPv6 because of some architectural consequences of IPv6? So a threefold approach, looking at the past, looking at the present, and try to look at the future. What are the consequences of these properties? So let's start with the history. So, when it all started, at least to the best of my knowledge, the first specification of IPv6 was done in December 1995. I can't really comment on that. As you might see, I wasn't in networking or IPv6 in 1995. Actually, when I'm thinking back, I think I just started to like girls at 1995, so I can't really comment on that. So at least from my knowledge, this is the first specification dating on December 1995 from Rob Hinden and Steve Deering. So you might take this as an anecdote, but obviously there is a message in it. So the message is the protocol which we are using the next 10, 20, 30, 50 years is going back to 1995. So 1995, that's a long time ago. So some random events from 1995. The state of Mississippi ratifies the abolition of slavery. Some countries joined the EU, Austria, Finland, Sweden. Actually, Tim Berners-Lee got the Young Innovator of the Year award for something called hypertext, as we know, the www nowadays. And we had this wonderful operating system, which was released by Microsoft, Windows 95. So, okay, back to a more serious note. So, 1995 was a long time ago. And in the mid-90s, there was a completely different understanding of network and what are the actual problems of networking. Packet forwarding was mostly done in software. It was slow, it was expensive, CPU cycle-wise. Broadcasts were considered harmful. We had no kind of virtualized environment besides some mainframe stuff, and no mobile networking in the sense of wireless or remote access. And certain understandings of the problems of networking led to certain architectural decisions when it comes to IPv6. So, as I wasn't involved in networking in 1995, I asked a good friend of us, Ivan Pepeljak, okay, what is your take on networking in 1995? So he said, yeah, they wanted to retain end-to-end paradigm, which got broken by NAT. Security was not that important, sorry for that. That it was basically non-existent. Bandwidth was really expensive. And multi-homing to 2 or more providers was virtually non-existent. And in the mid-90s, they thought, okay, we can maybe impose a worldwide hierarchical addressing scheme like the telephone system. Yeah, as we know today, unfortunately, this didn't work out as expected, as the handing out of PI addresses just started 15 years after the specification. So, another thing is, in the 90s, what I call the so-called Crypto-Optimism, or the concept of the Clipper chip. In the mid-90s, they were under the thinking, yeah, okay, every network security problem can be solved by means of some math or some algorithms. And this thinking shaped the way how IPv6 in general tackles network security problems. So for many RFCs, there is another complementary RFC which describes, okay, this technology can be enhanced by implementing certain crypto. For example, RFC 3315, DHCPv6, was complemented by RFC 3318, which adds an authentication mechanism to DHCPv6. So to get the idea, yeah, okay, we can do authentication of DHCPv6 messages by using a pre-shared key configured on the server and configured on the client, which unfortunately no DHCPv6 server I know of supports today, and no current client operating system also. So another one, neighbor discovery. Initial spec 2461 was complemented by RFC 3971, SEND, secure neighbor discovery. We all know how good SEND works in corporate environments. And that's the general problem, but because this gives you an idea how at the time they tried to solve potential IPv6 security problems based on a certain optimism. So back in the 90s, there was an understanding, and one of the leading principles of protocol design and implementation shaped by John Postel. Be conservative in what you do, be liberal in what you accept from others, which translates to, in networking terms, be conservative in what you send, be liberal in what you accept. Don't get me wrong, in general, this is a good principle, both for life and for networking, and it helped to drive the innovations, the internet innovation, not writing the standards the IEEE or the ITU way. But they do it in a liberal sense and are open-minded. So, but there's just one problem. The problem is this principle fails once an involved party deliberately plays foul. And as Eric Ellman states it, the robustness principle was formulated in an Internet of Corporators, which may no longer exist in 2014. So the question is, when it comes down to protocol design, is Postal's principle still a good guideline? This one has to find an answer to that. When it is, it should show in a way standards are still developed, which it doesn't. And if it's not, one should realize, okay, the way certain protocols dating back to the mid-90s as IPv6 are supposed to work does not longer fit to the internet as of today. So, I mean, you could say, yeah, Chris, that's all fine and dandy, but since 1995, a long time has passed, and there are smart people involved in the standardization space, doing smart things, taking smart decisions. And I'm really serious here. That's not ironic. And one might come up, yeah, okay, maybe they realize the internet has changed, and maybe they change standards. But there comes another problem. The problem is, in the IETF world, standards are not withdrawn. Like, okay, we specified something in the mid-90s, it doesn't work as it's supposed to be, let's do it another way. Standards are deprecated, which means, yeah, okay, there may be another way, but we still have to support the old way. Why is that? It's a simple reason. Inside the IETF, we have huge players. These are the vendors. And vendors have invested manpower in developing stack code. So when you now try to change standards and withdraw old ones, they say, hey, just wait a second. So does this mean that all our efforts are wasted in implementing stack code? So, and they won't support it. This leads us to the problem, what I call the culture of deprecation. Standards are not withdrawn, they are always deprecated, which means, okay, if a vendor wants to try or wants to do it the old way, he can still do it as these standards are not withdrawn. So, and now thinking back 15 to 18 years, this created a mess of code supporting all kinds of standards in the IPv6 space. And as I said, I call this the culture of deprecation. So what does this mean? It means that in many, many IPv6 stacks around, there are some remnants and some phases of IPv6 deployment. If you are into security, you may have heard about the routing header 0 issue. And you might think, okay, in the year 2014, routing header 0 is long gone. Unfortunately, you are wrong. Still, in some appliances nowadays, even if they are supposed to have recent code, some of them still support routing header 0, which was deprecated 2007. So 7 years ago, and it's still supported on some systems nowadays. So, which in turn, having these different generations and remnants of code means that predicting a certain stack's behavior, like the expectation, okay, I have an IPv6 system, it receives a certain packet, it will act upon this packet in a certain and predictable way, becomes increasingly hard. This seriously impacts predictability, and predictability is a good thing for security, but I will delve into this a little bit later. So we have different generations of IPv6 stacks. So the main initial RFCs developed in the late 90s. Then we had a long time where just nothing happens. Then we had the first, I would call it, major rewrite phase in 2007. And we are currently now in the second major rewrite phase with, of course, many, many minor rewrites here and there. So again, and pointing out which generation of IPv6 stack your network device, your operating system supports becomes increasingly hard. And when you can't predict it, that's bad for security. Just one example, neighbor discovery. We have 4 main generations of neighbor discovery. The initial spec, RFC 1970, 2410, yada, yada, yada. And then we have address selection. There is this in particular nasty and slippery thing called address selection. And most of you grew up with UI 64 for the generation of the interface identifier. Then there were some privacy concerns, so privacy extensions were developed. And now I would call it in the third iteration, we have RFC 7217, which, to boil it down in one sentence, developed a mechanism to generate a stable IPv6 address per network. So when I'm in one network, I will generate a random address, but I will keep this random address as long as I'm in the network. When I change network, another address is, of course, then generated randomly. So this makes it increasingly hard to predict the stack code and how your code will behave in your environment. So there's a little bit of gap we have to fill. Talking about time gaps, we also have the problem, due to the long warm-up phase, there's a huge asymmetry between attackers and defenders. Mark Heuse, who is the author of the first IPv6 attack tool, THC IPv6, initially released the tool back in 2005 at the PACSEC conference. So whereas the main RFC describing the most well-known problem, rogue router advertisement, and how to tackle this problem was released in 2011. So 5 years difference. So we have a huge asymmetry between maturity of attack instruments versus defense instruments. This doesn't really help at all when it comes to security. So to have an interim summary, we have to accept that V6 initially was based on a networking world which was fundamentally different from what it is today. Since then, it's got constantly enhanced, spoiled, however you would call it, by new standards and the culture of deprecation. And we have a huge asymmetry between attack and defense. But all this historical view aside, now let's have a look, okay, what do we have today and what are the properties of IPv6? So this should be an easy one. So one can say, yeah, it's an easy one. It's described in standards called RFC. Just look up the RFCs and you get an idea what IPv6 is and what are the properties of the protocol. Yeah, you won't be surprised that I cite Andrew Tannenbaum here. The nice thing about standards is that you have so many to choose from. So combine that with the culture of deprecation, and out comes a horrible mess of RFCs providing specifications contradicting each other. Some are deprecated, and it's just a mess where we are standing today. So don't get me wrong, I'm a strong believer in the, I would call it a Berkeley-driven liberal approach of standardization in the ITF world, not sitting 5 years with the books and 160 people from different national bodies being involved in releasing standards every 5 years. But when I had to name one example where this liberal and open approach failed, it would be, unfortunately, IPv6. So one might ask a simple question. Besides all the history, I know it has, history has its own momentum and chaos and cycles and so on, but from a mere technical point of view, if you ask me, describe IPv6 with one word, it would be this one: complexity. That's unfortunately the main property of IPv6, and as we all know, complexity impedes security. So some examples. So I was attending IETF meeting 89, which was beginning of the year in London, and one of the first statements in the 6-man working group was, yeah, I think we overspecified ND, so neighbor discovery. Well, that's an interesting point of view, but he's completely right. Unfortunately, I don't know the name of the guy who said it, but I completely agree with him. So another game, neighbor discovery. I know we need it. It's a core component of IPv6. But the initial specification, dating back to 1996, RFC 1970, obsoleted, whatever this means in IETF terms. I'm not 100% sure about that. Obsoleted by RFC 2461, 98, a whooping 93 pages. So then we have RFC 4861, September 2007, a whooping 97 pages, just for, one could say, an easy feature, neighbor discovery. Hey, I have an IPv6 address. I need your MAC address to communicate with you. Okay, do I need 97 pages for this? Apparently, yes. So, and this is mainly considered the latest stable one, cited in most textbooks and, if existent, stack documentation. So, let's just assume for a moment it makes sense what is written in there. It might be helpful to say, okay, this is how neighbor discovery is working. Well, unfortunately not. Well, because if you have a closer look, RFC 4861 updated by 5942, 6980, 7048, yada, yada, yada. So you get the idea. And I was quite surprised at IETF 89 in London, in the 6-man NV6 Ops working group, there was significant time spent on modifications of neighbor discovery. Approximately 30 to 50% of the time was spent modifying ND. I mean, it's 2014. We should be in a somewhat stable state when it comes to some core functionality like neighbor discovery. I know without neighbor discovery, IPv6 does not work. I'm fully aware of that. But hey, we should be in a more stable state than we are today. So, but just have a quick look at RFC 98, which was authored by Fernando Gont, and wearing my network security hat and having discussed, spoken, and researched on IPv6 security for some years. This is a very good RFC providing important implementation advice. So if you happen to implement or code IPv6 stacks, please do us all a favor, read the RFC and implement the advice. So the problem is still it adds another layer of complexity because of decision taking. How do I know whether or not my stack is implementing RFC 6980 or an earlier version? This is a problem in regards to predictability, as I've said earlier, which is bad for security. And we have yet another sector on the RFC time bar, as I have shown before. And it doesn't end here. There are quite a lot of drafts around talking about, okay, what kind of information should we check inside neighbor discovery packets to make sure nobody can tamper with it. So, so that means you still have to implement even more checks which the stack has to perform. So, and maybe you have already seen the relationship to the robustness principle. The less we trust in the robustness principle, or for that matter, peers on the internet or on a local subnet, the more checks we need. And as we can see in the latest development, it seems that nowadays we do not believe in the robustness principle. I do not either, at least when it comes to network security, as the robustness principle, as I've already said, was developed in an Internet of Corporators, which isn't the case anymore today. So, which for bloated protocols, which unfortunately IPv6 is, becomes increasingly difficult. So, another gem of complexity, extension headers. Well, I left this slide intentionally blank because there isn't much more to say to extension headers. Okay, I'll bite. Extension headers are, from a security point of view, a huge mess. Both from a security point of view and from a parsing point of view. When you have a protocol stack and it has to properly parse an IPv6 packet containing an arbitrary number of extension headers, this unfortunately has to fail. So the other thing is, as Fernando Gont has documented very well, these extension headers are increasingly blocked on the network perimeter anyway. And we have found out during our research that on many commercial firewall products, many of those extension headers are blocked by default. So just to name one example, because Checkpoint is the best example in this case, in their current release, R77 whatever, they filter all extension headers by default. The interesting thing is, when you want to enable extension header, you have to modify a specific file on the operating system called the table.dev to let it pass these extension headers. So you might ask naively, okay, when the stuff is increasingly blocked, why maintain it anyway? Or the better question could be, okay, we know these are blocked increasingly. Why do we spend resources by specifying new drafts which are introducing new extension headers? So, and if you would ask me, I mean, that may be a strong proposal, but I would just say get rid of them. Because from a security point of view, it's just a pure nightmare. We are doing a lot of research in regards to circumventing firewall rules and evading IDPS devices with the clever use of extension headers. And we have found out that we can easily circumvent, up until this point, every commercial firewall and IDPS product. So to sum it up, they are just a huge nightmare from a security point of view, and we still have to deal with them. Another gem for complexity, MLD. In the early days, when I started to play around with IPv6, I'm more of the practical networking guy. So when I try to understand a given protocol, I of course read the RFC. And what I do now then is I just fire up Wireshark or TCP dump and see, okay, what packets are getting exchanged between IPv6 nodes. So we see all this kind of stuff: duplicate address detection, neighbor solicitation, router solicitation, and router advertisements. In German, I call them the Dornröschenkuss. I don't know the proper translation, but it's the initial kiss to wake up IPv6. So a client receives a route advertisement, and then all the magic starts to happen. So, and I was always wondering, okay, I have seen all these MLD packets showing up in the packet trace, but what's the purpose do they serve, at least on the local link? I mean, I fully get it that we need MLD when we are doing true multicast routing, but on the local link, I don't see any purpose for MLD packets. So, and as we are doing quite a lot of IPv6 training, the participants always ask me, yeah, okay, Chris, you described what MLD is for, but what purpose does it serve? And I honestly told them, I don't know. They're just there for whatever reason. I mean, I can understand, as already said, and read the RFCs what the intended purpose is. But the operation reality is, in the link local scope, they serve no purpose. Maybe, okay, for some vendor proprietary mechanisms like MLD snooping, maybe. But, well, it's just another game of adding complexity to IPv6. And when you, what you see here is RFC 6434, node requirements for IPv6. In the first paragraph, they are referencing yet 4 other RFCs. And apparently it tells us to work probably ND. Let's just assume it's a simple and measure protocol, needs MLD. Sorry, but that's just not true. Yes, the clients are sending out MLD packets, but ND is working even without MLD because I've tested it in the lab. So who needs it, at least for the link local scope? And I love this one. In practice, operations, yada, 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 are rarely used, but add considerable implementation complexity. Yeah, thank you very much. IPv6 really nicely summarized in one line. So we have features which are rarely used in an operational space, but add additional implementation complexity. So, yeah. And so, talking about MLD, this is a classic one. Fail to properly parse. Just to make it sure, I don't do this to nitpick on Cisco. Every vendor is affected by this, but it just illustrates a point. So we have a complex protocol, MLD, which has to be implemented in the stack code of any networking device or bloated protocol, and the parsers are not capable of properly parse them, causing real vulnerabilities. So too much complexity in protocol space has a direct relationship to real vulnerabilities. And I actually only took this screenshot as during the time this security advisory was released in March, and during the time I was setting up a conference Wi-Fi network with a WLC, so I was tempted to include it here. But this is just for references, as every network device is affected by this. And we will see more vulnerabilities in regards to MLD or some other IPv6 functionality in every networking device you can imagine. So, thinking about all this, I'm scratching my head, thinking to myself, guys at the ITF, could you please reread RC 3439? There's a principle called the simplicity principle, section 5.3. Please read it and rinse and repeat and do it again. The simplicity principle is described as a precondition for large-scale networks. So adding all the IPv6 complexity stuff, one might ask himself, so this protocol isn't simple, it's pretty complex, so does it really scale to large networks? We will see. So, and there's another principle in RFC 3439, which is the coupling principle. It states that as things get larger, they often exhibit increased interdependence between components. So, which essentially states the more elements are involved, and the more interactions you have, the more complexity is the result of it. So, in IPv6, what do we have? Too many protocols, too many interactions. Add in some extra spice, extension headers, and here we are today. So from a perspective of economics, I just included it here because they have an interesting view or an interesting definition of risk. More things can happen than will happen. I will leave the slide for a couple more seconds so that you can reflect on that statement when thinking about the last couple of slides which I have shown you. So, but as we've seen, complexity is a huge mess, and there's a direct price which we have to pay, which is increased exposure and increased vulnerability. But the complexity aside, there are two other aspects of IPv6 properties. There's a really debatable trust model of IPv6, at least in the linked local space, and the integration of provisioning. So the trust model of IPv6 on a local link is we are all brothers. So ND is unauthenticated by default, send in itself complex and not supported on any corporate operating system, Microsoft. And this model from a personal perspective, I really like it. Like, okay, everybody is a good guy as long as he or she is in the same network as I'm in. We all trust each other and treat carefully. Nice approach, but for today's networking, it may not be the right approach. And it might sound cynical, but it is not supposed to be. But it is what it is, and we have to deal with it. And the reality is different, that this well-meant trust model, which Fernando Gont documented in a draft, what all can go wrong with neighbor discovery. The main reason is that complete neighbor discovery is unauthenticated. So this, of course, leads to some implications. One is its increased flexibility implies a somewhat increased complexity. So, and this, of course, impedes security. So there are, of course, security implications. Sorry for that. We have the same security problems like in the IPv4 world. We have rogue DHCP-v6 server, neighbor advertisement spoofing, which is the equivalent to ARP spoofing in the IPv4 world, yada, yada, yada. We have some additional ones, router advertisement-based attacks, neighbor cache exhaustion, and so on and so forth. So the problem is, as neighbor discovery is completely unauthenticated, this problem can't be addressed by the protocol itself. And yeah, I know send is, we have send, but forget about it in any corporate environment. So how do we tackle those issues? Well, we have to rely on the same mechanisms like in the IPv4 world. In the IPv4 world, to address ARP spoofing, the only reliable way was to implement some infrastructure controls on our access layer switches. DHCP snooping, dynamic ARP inspection, yada, yada, yada. So unfortunately, it boils down to the same in the IPv6 world. Router advertisement guard, DHCP-v6 guard, NDP inspection, and so on and so forth. But the huge problem is, as you may already know, they all can be easily circumvented by the clever use of fragmentation and extension header. So what they are doing, they are just splitting up, let's say, for example, a router advertisement packet, split it up into fragments, and the upper layer protocol information is, so the actual ICMP-v6 header, plus that it is a route advertisement, gets pushed to the second fragment, and the switch where, for example, route advertisement guard is implemented cannot cope with it because he only sees the first fragment, sees, okay, it's just a fragment, it's not an ICMP-v6 packet, it's not a route advertisement, so I let it pass, and all subsequent fragments will get passed through. So, and this is a fundamental problem, which can only be solved, at least in my opinion, by RFC 6980, that the fragmentation of all neighbor discovery related packet gets prohibited, and if a client receives a fragmented neighbor discovery packet, he should immediately discard it. This is the only operationally feasible way to tackle this issue. So, but all these security implications aside, what is the impact now on our approach to deploying IPv6? So now, so one could say this has been up until this point a somewhat abstract and maybe obscure discussion about the issues in the IPv6 world. So one might ask, okay, what are the actual security implications besides mentioning that the overall complexity does not help? So wearing a strict InfoSec hat from now on, I ask myself, okay, what elements do we have nowadays in our security model which might be impacted by IPv6? So we first have a notion of predictability. Then, of course, we have trust. I'm fully aware that trust and predictability are completely different things. But as stated in RFC 2828, the extent to which someone who relies on the system can have confidence to meet that the system meets its specification, for example, that the system does what it claims to do and does not perform unwanted function. Yes, that's something you want to have, predictability. Another one, identification. You typically do want to identify your users or your computers. This is mainly done in the IPv4 world by means of IP addresses, which may be harder in the IPv6 world thanks to privacy extensions. Then, of course, we have classification, so that we gather sufficient information to take well-informed decisions. And when we have these well-informed decisions, that we have the capability to enforce our security policy, which basically boils down to, okay, do I let a packet pass or do I drop it? And the retention of state as a supporting tool for classification and enforcement. Yeah, and simplicity, yeah, well, this has unfortunately long gone in the IPv6 world. So to make it a little bit more clear, as the picture is saying more than 1,000 words. So what do you want to know? For taking sound security decision, one wants to know, okay, who is the actor? The guy to the left. So when this guy is sending a packet and an IPv6 system receives this packet, how does the system react to this packet? How gets it parsed? And so on and so forth. And what about the state, which is maybe saved in some middle boxes for the retention of the state? So, and all these things might be hard in the IPv6 world. So who, when you want to identify a user or a given system, yeah, privacy extension being the norm now in every, at least desktop operating system in the Microsoft space since Windows Vista, and even modern Linux distributions are having privacy extension enabled by default. So let's say, for example, when you have a system gets compromised and it's spreading a worm in your environment, and you want to know, okay, what IP address has had the system 2 days ago? Well, good luck finding that out. I mean, you have the possibility to do that. It's just operationally much harder than in the IPv4 world. I mean, there are some things you can do. You can query over SNMP the neighbor cache, for example, of routers, or you can query the MAC address table, correlate this information so that you know, okay, 2 days ago, this system has had this IPv6 address. Yes, it's possible, but it's just operationally much, much harder than in the IPv4 world. So, so to the what? How does a end system behaves? Well, that's pretty hard as well, because not one stack behaves like another, not one firewall behaves like another, or any other network device, yada, yada, yada. So, and state in the middle boxes might be very difficult to keep. So, in IPv6, keeping state, as I've already said, keeping state in certain scenarios might become hard. At the end of the day, neighbor cache exhaustion is a state problem on the device. So it has just a limited amount of memory where it can store the association between IP address and MAC address. So we had the same issue more or less in the IPv4 world, where we had incomplete states with ARP. The problem is, with the increasing size of the network in the IPv6 world, the /64, there are a lot more potential entries in this neighbor cache than we had in the IPv4 world, where we had typically just a /24, which is 255 entries maximum. So, so this can only be tackled by some vendor-specific tweaks, which might not be documented very well, which then, of course, impedes the predictability once again. And still, there's much more opportunities for a state-oriented security model to fail in the IPv6 age. Just one interesting point in the mobile space, at least as far as I know. A mobile phone gets a /64 allocated from the mobile provider. So I'm very interested to see how they tackle a scenario like a single infected machine sitting in a broadband /64 and establishing valid connections to all kinds of servers or to a web server from many random source addresses based on this /64. Unfortunately, BCP 38 won't help you here. So this is another thing which we have to keep in mind when talking about keeping state in our middle boxes in regards to IPv6. So I already cited this approach. The problem is not being really able to predict for a certain operating system behaves in terms of neighbor discovery, address selection, interface identifier is a real problem. Another problem is to really understand this for every component in your network. You would have to do it for every operating system you have in your environment, for every network device, and for every other type of device which you have in your network. And given the growing number of embedded devices, Internet of Things, yes, I said it at least once in an IPv6 talk, it's a huge mess. And unfortunately, it will fail, as you just do not have the operational resources to do that because of all these variations in the stack behavior of certain devices. And a last one I mentioned, capabilities. Once you have an understanding about how a stack behaves, what they will do, and take informed decisions, do not expect, as of September 2014, that your current middle boxes are able to provide you the same capabilities in the IPv6 world as in the IPv4 world. We are doing quite a bit of research in regards to IPv6 capabilities of commercial firewall products. It got much better since last year. Still, there's quite a lot of room for improvement. So you have to keep that in mind. Yeah, so ranting is easy, but what does this all mean for us? So avoid additional complexity at all costs. We have enough of them, enough of complexity anyway. Keep your addressing scheme as simple as clean as possible. And whenever you think of enable some IPv6 features or security features, go and reread RFC 3439 and think about it. Is it a good idea to activate it, yes or no? That's a decision you have to make. And don't try to retrofit your IPv4 mentality into the IPv6 world. You can squeeze in your mentality with all the new knobs and clutches we have, but at the cost of yet another increased complexity. So, what can we do to mitigate these risk of IPv6 attacks? As I've already said, securing IPv6 on a local link is, as of today, actually pretty hard. So still, the basic rules apply, which are protocol agnostic, isolation, segmentation. Don't build large layer 2 domains. This should be common sense, but I have seen enough networks where they have huge layer 2 domains, and then they are wondering, okay, why does the network melt down at some point? Prevent compromise in the first place. Yes, I'm fully aware that it's easier said than done. I'm fully aware of that. And use infrastructure security controls on your access layer switches. That's the only operational feasible way to tackle those issues. Yes, they can be circumvented, but please include these layer 2 controls in your RFIs and RFPs now and today. Otherwise, vendors won't get pressured to implement them, so we have to wave with our money in order to make it happen. So, what does this all mean for you? Well, IPv6 is not a paper exercise. In environments where stability and security are relevant, and why else would you be here listening right now to me? You have to test, as you do not know how your IPv6-enabled host, network devices, whatever, behave in your network. Yes, I know management doesn't like the idea, okay, they have to spend extra budget on an IPv6 test lab, yes, but you have to do that because actually the citization of RFC 1925, the 12 networking truths, some things in life can never be fully appreciated nor understood unless experienced firsthand in regards to networking. And given the complexity and unpredictability, the only thing you can do is test, and test. So, and try to do not place too much security burden on state. You might not be able to maintain sufficient state on middle boxes in IPv6 networks. A stateful approach will be much, much harder in the IPv6 world than in the IPv4 world. You might depending on your environment. In the midterm, be able to re-engineer your security model to be based more on isolation or stateless filtering. And we have the problem of the culture of adding more and more middle boxes to our network. We have a yellow one, we have a blue one, we have a red one, and as soon as we implement them, we are secure. Well, no. And this will become even more a problem in the IPv6 world when you implement more and more devices which will keep state. So, conclusions. Again, I have been involved in IPv6 for a long time. When I'm thinking about, I think 1/3 of my whole life I have spent with IPv6. Whether or not it's good or bad, I have to decide it by myself. I believe in IPv6, and I believe in progress. It may not sound based on the presentation, but please don't shoot the messenger, me. I want to get home safe. So the IPv6 protocol space is unfortunately a huge mess, full of complexity, and dear IETF, it unfortunately gets worse every day. And you, the audience, still have to deal with the situation. Do your homework, you have to read specs, of course, and get your hands dirty, which means testing, testing, testing. But you should be careful who you're showing this presentation to. When you're showing it to your CIO, he could potentially say, I know it. Screw this IPv6. We don't implement IPv6. We just wait a couple of years until it's more stable. So beware of that, who you're showing to this presentation to. So, and I like to end this with a quote from, yet again, another RFC, again, 1925, which apparently has not been read by some parties involved in developing specs. In protocol design, perfection has been reached not when there's nothing left to add, but when there is nothing left to take away. So this is my final statement. Thank you very much for your attention, and have all a safe trip home.
Any questions for Chris?
So not so much a question, but I hate the idea of leaving on sort of a down note. So I want to commend you for bringing all this forward, because I can't imagine with a proprietary protocol in some company that you'd get this honest discussion of the pros and cons, and we need that in the community. You know, I'm sort of heartened by the fact that there's a lot of really smart people that get to be part of the V6 world that will help solve this. What I would point out is we're finding that because it's still a young protocol in implementation experience, we can try things that in a V4 world you can't get away with. So for example, we're debating, should we always clear the auto address bit? Should we actually not send router advertisements? And we can go test and certify that and even take those approaches. And we're kind of seeing that maybe you'll design different services within IPv6 for different kinds of networks. So maybe some networks I do want Slack and it's wide open and kind of, we trust everyone, and then other networks I don't. In V4, you really didn't get that. And it's so hardened by now you can't experiment. So while I see some of the problems, we're also seeing that this is a great time to innovate through some of the solutions to those problems, try things. Maybe we'll all just do 1280 as the MTU and there'll never be fragmentation, right?
Absolutely.
Reality could happen that can't happen in V4. V4 is set, and there's all kinds of warts in there that you can't get rid of. We can still actually get rid of some warts in V6 if we want to. So
yeah, thanks for your comment. And actually this highlights another point, the wonderful interaction between router advertisements and DHCP-V6. When I'm talking to network administrators who were not exposed to IPv6 before, and I tell them, yes, you can use DHCP-V6, but unfortunately you have to rely on router advertisements to propagate the default gateway, they're looking at me, are you serious? And that's still a bad thing. So from an operator's point of view, you should have the possibility to decide, okay, do I want to use route advertisements to provision my clients, or do I want to use DHCP-V6 to provision my clients with a fully functional IP address and DNS server and a default gateway. So as a network administrator, I should have the possibility to decide. But thanks for your comments.
Okay, well, thank you, Chris. Great presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you very much for listening.
Chris, this is really good. What a great way to end the conference. I want to say a few words. Thank you. Thank you for being with us in the last 2 days. We hope that the information that we provided was useful. Thank you to our presenters. Just a reminder, we recorded all the sessions, and they will be available on our virtual platform on the internet. You will receive an email with your logging information after September 29th. And we're also sending surveys. Thank you for helping us get better. Hope to see you again next year. Thank you again.